Hey everyone!
Hola a todos!
This is Jahaira.
And this is Stephanie, and welcome to Cuento Crimen podcast.
Y aquí on the Cuento Crimen podcast, we are a true crime podcast and we bring a new case every Wednesday.
Cada miércoles.
And these are cases that don't get much media attention, so chances are you haven't heard of some of these cases.
And we cover these cases in Spanglish.
Así que agarra a tu abuelita, tu abuelito, tu mamá, tu papá, a quien tú gustes, and come join us every Wednesday for a new true crime case.
Dorothea nació el 9 de enero del año 1929 en Redlands, California. Y de lo que leímos, su infancia no fue nada fácil.
Sus papás eran Trudy May y Jesse James Gray. Y se dice que los dos eran alcohólicos and things just sounded very toxic, hasta decir que su papá varias veces amenazó con quitarse la vida. And I think he actually did try a few times, and he did like these threats in front of his children.
Yeah, I think that's like a lot for a child to take in. You know, it's a heavy topic.
I mean, even as adults, right?
Yeah.
You get very like tense with that subject. So
yeah. And unfortunately, things got worse. En el año 1937, su papá murió de tuberculosis, and her mother sadly lost custody of Dorothea and her siblings in 1938. And later that year, she actually passed away in a motorcycle accident.
And all of those events happened in the span of 2 years. And you think about that, like as a child, you lost both of your parents. You're now in the system. It's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
And so Dorothea and her siblings, after that, they went to an orphanage. Y allí Dorothea fue abusada sexualmente por varios años.
That just adds more to the trauma that she's already like dealing with, you know? Y a los 16 años, Dorothea married for the first time. Ella se casó con un soldado que se llamaba Fred McFall, and he fought in World War II, and they had 2 daughters between the years 1946 and 1948. Y en el año 1948, Fred la dejó.
Y en el mismo año, Dorothea fue arrestada for purchasing women's accessories using forged checks in Riverside. And so she was charged and pled guilty to 2 counts of forgery, and she served 4 months in jail y 3 años de probation. Esto nomás fue el principio de la vida de Dorothea.
Yeah, as this case goes on, you will see this was just the beginning of everything that she did.
She did a lot.
And so in the year 1952, Dorothea remarried again, and this time to a merchant seaman named Axel Bren Johnson.
Y ellos vivían en San Francisco, que es muy cerca de donde vivimos yo y Steph. Like, we can literally take BART there.
Yeah.
And a few
BART
stops.
is like...
oh, that's right. Not everyone has BART.
It's like kind of like a subway type thing. It stands for Bay Area Rapid Transit.
Yeah. Just Google it. Just kidding. No, yeah, but it's like a subway. And it's just like a public transportation that we have here in the Bay Area. So yeah, so that's really close to us. Y cuando ella conoció a Axel, she went by the name, and I am so sorry if I'm butchering this, Tea Singola Neyarda. And she claimed that she was a Muslim of Egypt and Israel descent.
I mean, that's very interesting. The fact that she changed her name and
her
she's
whole
like
identity.
Yes, like a reinvented woman with a whole new identity, you know, to each their own, right? But I think it's a bit scary. I mean, I don't know why she had reasons to change her name, you know, but it shows que caras vemos, corazones no sabemos. Like, I wonder if her husband knew
of this new
name.
I don't know. You know what this reminded me of? Super random, but I'm also rewatching the show You. I don't know if a lot of you are, probably a lot of y'all are familiar with it, but that's him. That's what he did. Like, Joe.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Just changed identities over and over.
Move cities and he's a new person.
Yeah. How? I don't know. It's just, it probably goes, but yeah, but I don't know. It seems like Dorothea was the definition of sneaky. Y la relación entre ella y su esposo, Axel, no era nada sana. It was, again, very toxic. Axel viajaba mucho por su trabajo, and so whenever he was out, Dorothea would invite people over to their house, and there she would gamble all of Axel's money.
Moving forward to a few years later, en el año 1960, ella fue arrestada por operar un burdel bajo del disfraz de una firma de contabilidad en Sacramento. And for those who don't know what a brothel is, it's basically a house where a man can come and see women for specific services.
Yeah. And I feel like we kind of see a pattern here. We see it's like money. Ella nomás está mirando maneras de cómo hacer dinero. She was a hustler for sure. But Dorothea was found guilty y fue sentenciada a 90 días in Sacramento County Jail.
I feel like 90 días is a little bit.
It is. I feel like people have a longer sentence for a smaller charge.
Yeah, I don't know. I think this is a big deal. Like she was running something that she shouldn't have, you know? Mm-hmm. The following year, in 1961, Dorothea fue llevada al DeWitt State Hospital. Ella estaba tomando demasiado, and she was lying, and she also committed several suicide attempts. In the hospital, she was diagnosed as a pathological liar with an unstable personality.
Honestly, pathological liars are scary.
Mm-hmm.
I think her past actions speak volumes to this, like of her diagnoses. She did lie to her husband about her identity. And I don't know, that's a lot, you know, like reinventing who you are. But the story continues. In the year 1966, Axel se divorció de Dorothea, but she continued to use his last name for some time after that. Y ahora ella decía que su nombre era Sharon Johnson.
I mean, there she goes again, right, with a new identity. So at this point, she was doing this to hide her history, maybe her criminal record. Ella se estaba pasando como una persona amable. She was portraying herself as this good Christian woman.
Mm-hmm. Y ella estableció su reputación aquí en su nuevo hogar como una cuidadora, you know, meaning como brindando a las mujeres jóvenes un santuario de la pobreza y del abuso. Like, you know, she was very respected, and people who were hurting, people that needed healing would come to her.
And I creo que lo hacía sin cargo, right?
Yeah, it was free of charge, yeah.
Obviously, like, yeah, this is a woman who's doing, like, miracle work, like, helping other people, right?
She's an angel.
Right? To other people, but little do they know. So, por eso les digo que caras vemos, corazones no sabemos.
You're like, yeah.
Yeah, like, there, right? That's literally the definition right there.
That's the dicho for this.
Yeah, because even though this was her reputation, lo que ella hacía con esas personas era una pesadilla. She was taking advantage of the, you know, more vulnerable people that needed help, right? Mm-hmm. And we'll get into that right now.
And, you know, in the mix of all of this, Dorothea remarries again in the year 1968, and this was her third marriage. Pero después de 16 meses, ellos se dejaron por violencia doméstica. Her husband, Roberto, was very abusive, y después de su divorcio, Dorothea se enfocó en administrar una casa de huéspedes ubicada en 21st and F Street in Sacramento.
So Dorothea was trying to be a resource to alcoholics, homeless people, and people struggling with mental illness. She was holding meetings for them and, of course, like offering them a place to stay as well.
And, you know, like, escuchar esto, you think this is great. Like, this is what the community needs. But it definitely had a double life, kind of like a double motive for her. Porque ella también les ayudaba a recibir sus beneficios de seguro social. And, like, it even got to the point where Dorothea was known by the local social workers because she was in there all the time, you know, helping this person, helping that person. And she was known as, you know, the older lady with the big glasses that was so kind and, you know, gentle with the people that needed her help.
And because of this, she was respected in the community. Mm-hmm. I mean, even the social security workers knew her, respected her. And I think that shows how, like, her history, right? She's changed her name. She's changed her personality so many times. Mm-hmm. And, like, now this is, like,
who she is.
Who she is.
She was devoted.
Yeah, devoted. Day in and day out, she was devoted to portray herself as this, like, older, kind woman. Mm-hmm. And that's crazy. In the year 1978, Dorothea was charged and convicted of illegally cashing 34 state and federal checks that belonged to her tenants.
34. That's a lot. Mm-hmm. No, dos por 34.
34.
Yes, it's a few. Y when she was charged with this, le dieron 5 años de probation para pagar $4,000 en restitución. And I feel like these are the types of crimes that she had. Like, she was known for scamming people, you know, taking advantage of them, or just not saying her true identity. Like, this was who she was.
Yeah.
She was a scammer.
Yeah, like for sure. Yeah, we see it over and over again. Like in the beginning of the episode, we mentioned how she was gambling her husband's money. Mm-hmm. So it's a pattern.
And I just like feel, yes, she was helping people, but to what extent? Like, what was the price of her help? Because at this point, like, ella administraba el dinero de sus inquilinos. She was kind of like controlling them financially.
Yeah. Y también the fact that most of her tenants were alcoholics or, you know, were mentally ill raises a lot of questions. You know, like banderita roja, like, where is that money going? Why is she the one in charge? Is she being an honest person with that money?
Exactly, yeah. And I feel like this also becomes like a bigger red flag because slowly but surely her tenants started passing away.
Mm-hmm. That's a big question, you know, if it's like happening so often, you know. In April 1982, Ruth Munro, de 53 años, estaba viviendo con Dorothea en el apartamento de arriba, pero al poco tiempo de mudarse, she passed away from an overdose.
Y Dorothea les dijo a la policía que Ruth estaba muy deprimida porque su esposo estaba muy malo. Here you have like this older woman, right, who passes as a saint telling you this is the reason why my roommate did this. And so the police thought that that was enough to not investigate and to just, you know, let it be an overdose.
Pero a las pocas semanas de la muerte de Ruth, another tenant of Dorothea's, Malcolm Mackenzie, de 74 años, llamó a la policía y les dijo que Dorothea tried to drug him and steal from him.
She was convicted of 3 theft charges and sentenced to 5 years in prison. So now, like, in a span of a month, maybe, there's 2 altercations within her house. I feel like that's starting to grow suspicion on some people. And so they give Malcolm the right. Dorothea was convicted of 3 theft charges and sentenced to 5 years in prison, pero ella nomás estuvo en la cárcel por 3 años. Y mientras que ella estaba en la cárcel, she actually found a pen pal named Everson Gilmouth. And they quickly started a relationship. And so by the time that Dorothea was out, Everson was the one to pick her up and take her home with him.
We don't know much about this relationship, but what we do know is that Dorothea was still up to her old scam-like ways, porque el noviembre del año 1985, she hired a man by the name of Ishmael Flores para que le instale unos paneles de madera en su apartamento.
Dorothea paid him for his work with a red Ford pickup. Ella dijo que la troca le pertenecía a su novio Everson, pero que su novio ahora estaba en Los Ángeles y entonces él ya no necesitaba esa troca.
Which, as y'all can guess, was a lie. Mm-hmm. This truck belonged to Everson, but Everson never moved to LA. Like, this was his truck.
Yeah, and it gets even worse because on January 1st of 1986, a fisherman spotted a coffin-like box, you know, just floating along. And so he called it into police. And when investigators opened the box, encontraron el cuerpo de un hombre, and it was very badly decomposed that it took 3 years to identify that this body actually belonged to Everson.
Turns out que Dorothea asked for a 3x3 by 4 foot box para guardar unas cosas. Y después que le hizo la caja, Dorothea shut it and asked for help to dump it.
Y ella le dijo al muchacho que it was just a bunch of junk, that she just needed this box to put in some stuff that she wanted to get rid of in the apartment. And then she asked him to help her dump the box on the riverbank at an official junk dumping site.
Of course, 3 years later, it was known that inside that box was actually Everson's body. Y todos esos años, Dorothea was still collecting Everson's pension.
And so just a recap of that, because it's a lot, right? Mm-hmm. So she meets Everson. He's now her boyfriend. She somehow ends up murdering him, puts him inside this coffin, which she asked someone to build for her. Mm-hmm. And then she disposes of the body. And for 3 years, it took them 3 years to find out that it was him.
Yeah.
Y mientras todos esos años, she's still taking his money.
So it seems que a ella nomás le importa el dinero, right? She's doing maybe all this because of that. Like, that's her motive. And so this went on for a few years. She would open her house to drug addicts, homeless people, and people who had mental illness and things like that. Pero ella les quitaba their mail. So she was the one pretty much managing their lives, basically.
And she was also very smart about it because even when investigators or social workers would come by, you know, to check up on these people, no one saw anything wrong with this situation, which is why she got, como se dice, like, she was able to do it for such a long time, right? Because she always checked out the checklist for if this is a good, stable home for these people. But her neighbors were the ones who grew, you know, worry for her. Los vecinos empezaron a notar que las personas que entraban casi nunca salían. And in particular, there was a specific man who went by the nickname Sheaf that stood out to them.
So Sheaf was homeless and an alcoholic, and he was known around the community. Los vecinos de Dorothea notaron que Sheaf se estaba quedando ahí con Dorothea. They remember him doing work around Dorothea's yard and things like that. Pero de repente como que desapareció y ya no lo miraban.
And even though many are starting to grow suspicious of her or just, you know, seeing things that are not adding up, no fue hasta el 11 de noviembre del 1988 que la policía estaba investigando la desaparición de Álvaro, also known as Bert Montoya, that things started to unravel.
Él tenía esquizofrenia y él fue reportado desaparecido por un trabajador social. And they knew he was living with Dorothea, so naturally they go to, you know, her house to ask her about him. Y cuando llegan ellos allí, notan que the vibe was off and like something was just not right.
The vibe never lies.
Yeah.
That's one thing I've learned. And the first thing that they noticed was un puño de tierra afuera in el front porch de Dorothea. And to them, it just seemed like too much soil. Like, it just, como dices, like something did not feel right. Y entonces empezaron a preguntar, but again, las explicaciones que Dorothea estaba dando, they weren't adding up.
So one thing led to another, and investigators looked into the soil, and what they discovered is scary.
Yeah. When they started digging up in the soil, encontraron el cuerpo de Leona Carpenter de 68 años y ella también era una inquilina de Dorothea.
So they start searching her whole property, and as they are looking, they find a total of 7 bodies. And these people were all her tenants, people that she was supposedly helping.
That is scary. Imagine like you're there to ask questions about this man who's missing and then you find 7 other people.
Yeah.
That is really scary. And all in all, Dorothea was charged with a total of 9 murders. Her boyfriend, Everson Gilmouth, of 77, and her tenants, which were Ruth Monroe, of 61, Leona Carpenter, of 68, Álvaro Bert González Montoya, of 51, Dorothy Miller, of 64, Benjamin Fink, of 55, James Gallope, of 62, and Vera Faya Marin, of 64, and Betty Palmer, of 78.
That's a long list, like 9 people.
Yeah. It's sad porque la mayoría de sus víctimas fueron drogadas and most of them died from an overdoses. Y lo que hacía Dorothea, like, dice que once, you know, they passed away, ella las envolvía en sábanas y después with the plastic lining right before dragging them to her backyard for a burial.
And yeah, despite all this evidence, Dorothea was not arrested right away. Like, when the investigation began y una de esas veces after being interviewed, ella les preguntó por permiso de ir a comprar un vaso de café. And instead of doing that, she actually fled to LA.
Dude, the audacity that this lady had.
Yeah.
Like, you were caught with 7 bodies in your home. You just confessed to the murders, but you're still trying to plan an escape. That's just crazy to me.
And for what? Like, what? Is she going to go start a new life?
Right? Probably. I mean, she did it multiple times. Yeah. Why not? But like, this woman really was going to try it all. She was not going to go down without a fight. And she made it to LA. Like, when she got to LA, she meets this older man at a bar. Pero el hombre la reconoció. You know, like, her image was all over the news. Y de inmediato, él llamó a la policía to turn her in.
Honestly, I'm so glad someone recognized her because this is a scary lady. She's capable of doing, like, awful things.
This man could have been her next victim for all we know. Entonces, ya la policía fue por ella and she was finally actually arrested, which should have happened from the beginning. And her trial began on October 1992. Y duró un año.
Hubo más de 130 testigos y la policía cree que ella usaba sleeping pills para dormir a sus inquilinos y después los sofocaba and would hire someone to dig holes in her yard where she would bury them.
Which makes sense as to, you know, if it goes back to the man, the one that was named Sheaf, right? He was the one doing a lot of digging and then he disappeared. But at the end of it all, Dorothea was convicted of 2 first-degree murder counts, including special circumstances, and 1 second-degree murder count. The rest of the murders were inconclusive. Like, the jury did not agree, right? Like, was it really an overdoses? Was it really natural causes? It just really wasn't known.
Dorothea received life without possibility of parole, and she was taken to the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, California. Ella nunca confesó a las matanzas. She kept her story that her tenants died of natural causes her entire life. Like, she never admitted it.
Y la historia de Dorothea allí quedó. She passed away on March 27th, 2011, at the age of 82, and she was still in Chowchilla, and her cause of death was natural causes.
Dorothea definitely left a mark in her community, pero desafortunadamente, it was not a good footprint. It definitely marked the community of Sacramento.
Yeah, and I think it was also just like a reminder, you know, como dijiste, Steph, like, caras vemos, corazones no sabemos. Like, here's this lady who looked sweet and innocent, but she turned out to be the total opposite, you know?
That's crazy, because this is like an older woman, like, who's kind and, for sure.
I get it. Like, a lot of her tenants did have, like, a lot of, you know, health complications. They were older. But I don't know. I feel like it was just too much of a coincidence for her not to have had any foul play in that.
Yeah, I think she's definitely guilty for sure.
Yeah, and like you also have that man that actually called the police, right, to tell them that she tried to drug him. So
yeah, and I mean, she has so much history of changing her name and things like that. So
yeah, and it's also just very tragic because we did hear about like her childhood, and a lo mejor quizás eso made her be the way she was. You know? So shout out to my sister for sharing this case. Again, this serves as a reminder that we don't have to cover just missing or murder cases. Like, we can do serial killers or just stories like these. You know? So if you have any requests, make sure to send it over our way. I think we're getting to the end of our request list. So
slowly but surely.
Yeah. So we need new ones. I was kidding. But yeah, no, just make sure to share. And as always, our post will be on Instagram if you want to make any comments or have any comments on this episode. And we will be back next week with another true crime case.